This conference will now be recorded.
Are you finished? Thanks. Okay, the time is now 6:29 p.m. We are starting the regularly scheduled meeting of the Village of Winnebago Planning and Zoning Board. As there's still the state guidelines allowing for remote attendance at meetings.
That is correct.
Frank, if you would read that into the record for me, please.
Sure. The governor has issued a disaster declaration that covers the village of Winnebago and it's statewide. I, as a village president, have determined that an in-person meeting is not practical because of this disaster, that, we can't have people participate virtually. All members of the public body participating in the meeting shall be verified and can hear one another in all discussions. So again, Irv and Dennis, are you able to hear us?
Yes.
I see Molly is here from Trajectory Energy. I believe she is counsel for Trajectory, and I see that she's present as well.
Yep, that's right.
Thank you. And at least one member of the board is physically present, or the chief legal counsel, and we have established that here. All votes must be conducted by roll call. We had to give 48 hours notice that we would be meeting in this manner, which we did. It was on our agenda, and it had the login information for the virtual meeting. And again, each member attending by audio or video conference is considered present at the meeting for purposes of determining a quorum. And we also must have a verbatim record of the meeting, and we are recording this meeting. So with all of those things, we are compliant with the statute.
Okay, thank you. And the village does retain those recordings?
That's correct. We do make them available to the public.
Please take the roll call.
Hooker.
Here.
Emmer.
Yes.
Eubank.
Yes.
Tony.
Yes.
McDougal.
Yes.
Pitney.
Yes.
Okay, there's a quorum for this meeting. Does anybody have a conflict of interest?
No.
Okay, does not appear to be any conflicts of interest. Now, we only have we have 3 members of the public. Do you guys have any comment? No. Ms. Signer, do you have any comment?
Is now the best time to comment on the solar ordinance, or would it be better if I comment at the time that you start talking about it?
If you have a brief comment right now, I would entertain your being able to comment later while we go over it.
Okay, I just kind of have some general guidelines for the discussion. So it might be a little more practical to do it right before the solar ordinance, but I'll follow whatever procedure is best.
What guidelines are you talking about?
Oh, I just mean like some kind of commenting about the comments that we made on the draft ordinance that you would have all seen or received.
Okay, I'll go ahead and allow you to give your comments when we get to that issue.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
I'm going to skip over the approval of the minutes right now, so these gentlemen can leave if they want to. We just finished having 2 public hearings. With respect to the first public hearing regarding the Cash Drive property, regarding a change in zoning and a special use permit. Is there any discussion of any of the board members about that application and request?
In talking about XXX Cash Drive from a village perspective, I believe that that's a positive thing for the village to change the zoning to general business district. And that would be whether they move forward with their project or not. I think it just makes sense to have that rezoned. And I believe their particular use would be a good use for that property and where it's located. And from looking at their designs and what they've put forward, I believe the ultimate look at the facility, would be a similar look as to the other businesses in the area. I think what they've said about the landscaping and having it blacktopped, and not having lights like a football stadium, I think that all would tend to be that they're trying to build it in a manner that would be very suitable for that location and for the village. So from my perspective, I believe that the zoning map amendment should be granted, and also a special use permit for a storage facility. I would entertain that.
Okay, and I would agree, given the zoning classifications of the adjoining properties or adjacent properties, that the general business would be a good zoning for this property. So I think it should be changed to general business. Any other comments or discussion?
I fully agree with both Frank and Bill. However, I'm concerned that we would not move forward this evening until the required notifications have been made.
Okay, and our attorney, Gaziano, has come up with a idea about that. So Mary, if you would explain to Mike what your idea is.
My recommendation would be that, since we've had the discussion, that we would be able to get an appearance and waiver from the individuals, the surrounding property owners, presumably, so that you could take a vote on the recommendation to the village board, subject to obtaining those consents by the surrounding property owners. That way it allows you to take action on what you're doing. But yet that would be subject to that.
And I believe our function is just to recommend to the village board. We do not make any final action on it.
Understood. But I could go along with Mary's recommendation.
The other thing that I would just like part of the record, I know we had it in the public hearing, but we run it as part of this record, is that originally there was an application that was submitted by by Mr. Camp and Mr. Winter regarding this, dated January 24th of 2023. It was one document, and we are working on a zoning application that they're kind of helping us with. That listed in the attorney section, it listed Frank Eubank as their attorney, and that was not correct, and it has been since superseded by the two separate applications dated in March that they have submitted. So I just wanted it clear that Frank wasn't individually representing them in his capacity as village attorney, because he and I had had this discussion.
Private attorney.
In his capacity as village president, he had guided them or helped them answer questions as they were attempting to fill out the document. But I think now it's very much clarified that in that section where it lists attorney, that it says to be determined or still to be selected or something of that nature. So just so that there's no concern that the village president was not in his individual capacity acting as the attorney for either of the applicants.
Hey, Mary, I'm going to ask you a question I think I know the answer to, but with respect to the special use permit, the current village ordinances provide now that the village board sets any limitations or restrictions on the special use. Correct?
Correct.
Okay, because I still keep in my mind the 1957 where we used to do it, so that's none of our function anymore.
Well, I can tell you though that there certainly can be recommendations made by this body, and that has been what's been done in the past.
Okay.
And I think that the board kind of depends on this body to do that. If there are any specifics that you feel that need to be in place.
Then I guess, if we vote now on the change of zoning, do we do the change of zoning and then the special use after that, or do it together?
That's really your choice. If you have no problem with the change in zoning, you can do the change in zoning and then you can do the special use permit. It has just been that I put them together like that because we've had the situation in the past where They didn't want the change in zoning unless it was with that special use permit. We had, for example, change in zoning with a special use permit for townhouses. The village at that time wanted it that if they weren't going to use it for townhouses, then they wanted the zoning to revert back.
Okay.
So as long as you're comfortable with the change in zoning staying, regardless of whether or not they ever have a special use permit for that facility, then you can vote on the zoning change by itself. And then the special use permit separately.
I think the applicants are desirous of having a determination about the special use by the end of April, if possible, because I know they're financing their ability to start construction hinges on, I believe, that time frame. And it also may impact their desire to not move forward purchasing the village portion. It could impact that. So I know that we're anticipating not only a zoning change, but also a special use permit recommendation one way or the other.
And this special use would come under the UDO, correct? So it'd be subject to everything that's currently in the UDO.
Correct.
Does anybody have any restrictions beyond the UDO that they would like to bring forth to recommend to the village board?
You know, the main thing that we usually have with these, and I know that Joe mentioned this, is the lighting. And I know they proposed a certain type of lighting fixture. I don't know if they've specified where it would be, but that may be something where we want to make sure that we have some type of specification as to how bright, how tall it can be, where it's going to be at. It's less of a concern because we do not have residential right there, so it's not as important to worry about where the direction of light would be. But I think we still need to be sure that we're not going to have stadium kind of lights that are going to be lighting up the area.
Right, and I apologize for it, but I'm still not totally up on the UDO, so I'm not sure what
The lighting.
standards are in there. If in fact the UDO does not cover this to that degree, how can we vote tonight with a recommendation with restrictions that we could place on a special use?
Mhm.
I guess that, how high would the lights that you intend to put in and around this facility be?
Yeah, so, what I was gonna say was, we're not doing light poles or anything like that, it would be an attachment to the building itself.
How high is the building?
The highest at the peak is 8'4".
Okay, would your lights be at the peak or would they be somewhat lower?
They would be at the low point. At the low point, but as you can see in the picture that we provided, it does have it would attach to the building and swoop up a bit. Because, it's not something that would be sitting 10 feet in the air or anything like that. In fact, on our drawing, we show how many fixtures go on each facility, below the illustration with the red box. So these are, in our mind, designed.
So the yellow
lights, correct.
Round things are the
Yellow.
light fixtures?
Yes.
Okay.
The other thing that was listed on the light fixtures themselves were the lumens. So 3,000 lumens is one light. And if you think of a parking lot, say at the grocery store, one light pole is 12,000 lumens, or 3,000 for one light. It's really to light the way, not to brighten up the whole lot.
Okay, I'm looking at the picture of the unit, and are these squares just below the roof where the lights?
Yes.
Does the light fixture shine straight down or is it angled?
It's down to
Straight down.
light the pathway.
Are they hooded
Yes,
to reflect the light?
yes.
I would say that with the lights that they're proposing, that they're attached to the buildings and the light fixtures they're utilizing, I think that would be appropriate. So if we could, I guess, have them adhere to that or something similar to.
Or if we use word that for our recommendation to the board.
So are we actually voting on the applications or are we just voting on the change of zoning?
So the application's asking for a change of zoning and also a special use.
Okay.
So we don't necessarily vote on the application to accept it. What we're saying is they're applying to have this change. We're having the hearing and the discussion, and then we are recommending whether we want to allow them to have the zoning change and allow them to have special use with any restrictions.
And we're
Okay.
using the term recommend because the village. board
Right,
is
they
the one that
have
decides.
final approval, I understand that, we just recommend.
Right.
I guess my concern is, on page 2 of 14, there's required application materials. And we talked with Mary a little bit about,
What are you looking at right now?
I'm looking at the application, zoning application.
Those required application materials.
Yes, right. And I don't have any indication that we have all of that.
Right, so the application form is this form. The application fee, we technically don't collect a fee because we've not approved a fee yet. And the legal description, I believe, we as the village have the legal description. I don't know, Mary, if it was presented to you. Or-
Yeah, because I had to put it in a public hearing.
Right. We do have preliminary drawings. We don't have floor plans or building elevations, I don't believe.
What page are you on, Mike?
It's listed as page 2, but I think it's actually page 3.
Well, it's page 2 of
The top
14, it's in the left-hand corner.
Yes, that's correct.
Oh, I see where you're speaking.
And again, this is a form that we're trying to utilize and see how it works. We have not adopted it yet.
That's what makes this a little confusing, because
We're trying to get a little more structure, because I'll tell you, this is a lot better than what we used to have. And so, I went through this with them a couple weeks ago and said, these are items that you really need to respond to so that we can get it in. Because they got it in, I think, at least a week ago. I think it was last Monday or so you would get, so that we'd have it for today. So the idea is they put this together for that use. I know they have a detailed written statement explaining the reason for the request. That's on the other side of the folder. And
I guess the issue is that, and this comes in part in terms of where we ran into the issue about the notification of the property owners. We've been, just because I've been dealing with this for years, where literally someone would come on a piece of notebook paper and say, I want to change my zoning to my property, and here's a picture of my property, and they would move forward on that. Well, obviously, there were issues with doing it quite that way. Frank has taken on the task of trying to get something much, much more aligned with what the county is. And we gave them this application to use, not having adopted it yet, but said, okay, can you basically try to work with this application so we can see how it works for the village? With someone previously, we didn't have the application, but we had said, but you have to tell us the surrounding property owners, that that's your obligation. So it's kind of where we are in in the, I don't want to say the learning process, but we definitely are in an implementation process. So if we see that not each and every one of these things has been given, I guess that's up to this board to decide if they think that they can't make a decision without those items. Once these forms are formally adopted, then absolutely, you don't have it, it wouldn't even come to this board because it would be rejected before it would ever get here.
So this application is not necessarily been formally adopted.
Correct.
So these are guidelines.
Correct.
Best way to describe it at this point.
Yep, that's a good way to say it, Mike. And we did have Chairman Emmert, Attorney Graziano, and I, maybe Kelly, you were involved in a meeting with Joe and Ryan, and we also had Casper, our village building official, in that meeting, and sat down to go over their original application, and then they submitted this as an update to it along with these additional drawings. So they've been very inquisitive and trying to find out what they need, and part of it is we're trying something new, so don't know exactly what all we need, but they're trying to give us what we're requesting, which I told them, I said, this is a lot more than what we usually get. It's a lot more detailed than what we usually get. It has information that we normally don't receive, because what Mary said is typically it. Sometimes we don't even get it right. You just call up and say they want to annex in or they want to change zoning, and our previous zoning board chairman would say, okay, let's go, let's start talking about it. And we would start talking about it. So they're trying to get it to where we have information. I mean, I can tell you I was impressed when I walked in last week and saw that we had at least 7 of these folders with all of this information in here sitting right there for all the zoning board members to use. It was a nice surprise to see that. And really, that's what we're going to be trying to get to for every application from this point forward.
Okay. Yeah, and certainly, I can't emphasize enough, once it's adopted, Kelly would stop it at the stage of, you don't have everything, it's not even coming to the zoning board yet. And on the other hand, not having to do with this, but we've had some other special event type of applications that, again, we've tried to model on the county, and then people in the village have said, oh my God, that's just too much to deal with, and they decide not to do it. So we're trying to find that balance of what meets the needs of our community. Now, we don't have to be more formal than we need to, but we want to make sure we have the basics covered.
Now we understand.
That's,
And I didn't notice anything right off the top about specific lighting requirements in the UDO, and I don't know if we specifically addressed that. My recommendation would be that we do put in that special use about the lighting and that it conform to really what they're presenting.
Just give me a second. okay, we could have a restriction that no outside lighting fixture on the subject property shall be over 8 foot 4 inches high above the ground. And all outside lighting shall be attached to a storage unit. All outside lighting fixtures shall point straight downward and shall have a hood on the fixture to minimize light from emitting to the side, and shall not exceed a brightness of 3,000 lumens.
Well, technically, they'll be higher than 8 foot 4, though, correct?
It doesn't have to be.
So like you've got your peak of your roof at 8.4, so the lights are actually gonna be lower than 8.4.
Oh.
So that's why I came up with 8 foot 4 inches.
Sounds like just what you're proposing.
So if that, I guess I would recommend that restriction be recommended to the village board if this committee passes a resolution to recommend the zoning change and recommend the special use permit to be issued to the applicants on the subject property.
The other thing is, I don't know, do you have these for the next criteria? So that when I go through those, just to make sure everyone agrees that these don't.
Okay, Attorney Gazelle has given me a portion of the UDO, and the UDO contains review criteria to be considered when determining approval of a special use permit. A, the proposed use at the specified location is consistent with the goals, objectives, and policies of the comprehensive plan. Any comments?
I believe it has met that.
I think so too. Does anybody disagree? The proposed use is consistent with the general purpose and intent of the applicable zoning district regulations and complies with the requirements of the article. And I believe the business district specifically provides for special use of, for storage units in a business district.
Correct.
The proposed special use is not materially detrimental to the public health, safety, comfort, and general welfare, and will not result in material damage or prejudice to other property in the vicinity. I think it meets that. Does anybody disagree? The proposed use is compatible with and preserves or enhances the character and integrity of adjacent development and includes improvements necessary to mitigate adverse development-related impacts such as traffic, noise, odors, visual nuisance, and other similar adverse effects to adjacent development in neighborhoods. I think it complies with that.
Yep.
Anybody disagree? The proposed use does not generate pedestrian or vehicle traffic that will be hazardous to the existing and anticipated traffic in the neighborhood. I think it complies with that. The proposed special use complies with all fire, health, building, plumbing, electrical, and stormwater drainage regulations of the village, county, state, and federal agencies.
As far as we know.
And the building plans have to go to all of the individuals anyway, so that the fire department comments if they have any issues.
And adequate utilities exist to service the proposed special use.
Yep.
I think that
Right there.
is provided for. So I think that it meets the criteria, so long as we have the restriction with regard to the lighting. Personally, I would be agreeable to recommending to the village board that they grant the zoning change to, is what, general business, is that correct term? With a special use for storage units. Does anybody have a motion?
It sounded like the motion.
Yeah. I'd make a motion.
I just said I would be in favor of it. I don't know that it's appropriate for me to move.
I'd make a motion that we recommend to the general village board that the zoning be changed to general business district, I believe it's number 3. And that a special use permit be granted for the operation and use of self-storage facility. And the special use permit would not only be on the XXX Cash Drive, but also on 105 Cash Drive. Is it appropriate to make that? Because we're doing a zoning for one, but we're doing a special use and asking for special use on both parcels.
I would do those as 2 separate motions.
Okay, so the first motion will be just with regard to the property at XXX Cash Drive. So that'll be the zoning change to general business district and the special use permit for a storage facility. That would have the requirement, as stated by Chairman Emmert, that any lighting fixtures be affixed to the structures on the property at a height no higher than 8 foot 4 inches. And that they generally have the light point downward and have a hood that generally has the light directed down. And that the lumen shall not exceed 3,000. And I'd also, as part of the motion, state that this is subject to the waiver from the nearby neighbors that are required to be given specific notice.
Subject to the waiver and consent of the property owners within 250 feet of the subject property.
I think that's.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion on this? Roll call vote, please.
Giving,
Yes.
Emmert,
Yes.
Coney,
Yes.
McDougal,
yes,
Pitney,
Yes.
Booker.
Yes.
Okay, the motion passes unanimously. You're free to stay if you want to. I think we're done.
Well, we need to do the second.
Yeah.
Oh,
We have the,
They want the other.
we have the
two.
special use for the
Okay.
other property as well. So with the special use permit for the storage units of property located at 105 Cash Drive, that's the second application. And again, I would make the same motion with the same requirement. I move that they be granted a special use permit for storage units on that property with the requirement of the lighting being no higher than 8 foot 4 inches and be attached to the structures on the building. And the light shall be generally pointed downward with a hood that would minimize any light cast out to the sky or to the sides. And shall not exceed 3,000 lumens per light fixture. And again, subject to the consent of the nearby property owners that are within 250 feet of the subject property.
And that's a motion that this board will recommend to the village board that they pass such a resolution.
Correct.
Or ordinance. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second it.
Any further discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Coney,
Yes.
McDougal,
Yes.
Emmer,
Yes.
Gibbon,
Yes.
Booker,
Yes.
Pitney.
Yes.
Motion passes. Okay, now I think we're done with cash drive.
Right.
Welcome to stay.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your time. Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Okay, the next item on the agenda would be a discussion and possible motion to recommend to the village board regarding the change in zoning of the property.
It's 7219 Cunningham Road, also it's 7215 Cunningham Road.
Cunningham Road, commonly known as Meridian Nursery. I guess I'll start a discussion stating that given the character of that area and all of the uses around it, I personally believe that general industrial district would be the appropriate district for this property if it were to annex into the village of Winnebago upon becoming adjacent to the village in the future. This zoning would also allow Mr. Furch to continue doing what he's doing and possibly more. District 4, General Industrial District, principal permitted uses are any use except a structure for dwelling purposes, provided, however, the use complies with the provisions as set forth in District 4. So it basically allows anything other than residential. It allows the heavy industrial if necessary, and that's what it's surrounded. It's surrounded by oil tanks, a natural gas facility. To me, this seems to be the appropriate zoning classification. Anybody else have any comments?
And again, it's currently zoned in the county heavy industrial, so it is a mirror to, it's basically putting it into what we have as general industrial.
And allowing us as the village to then control the zoning pursuant to the pre-annexation agreement
Now,
and
one
the
thing,
building.
I think that myself is the correct zoning, but I guess I do have a question for Attorney Gaziano. I know that
Passing these down.
yeah,
Thank you.
what I'm passing out is pages of the Unified Development Ordinance, and I just read the principal permitted uses for the general industrial district. One question I do have, and this is going to come up later in the discussion with respect to solar facilities. The UDO, when you look at the table at 616.02, table 6.2 land use, then you have the following table, and it lists a number of various uses. And then, it lists the zoning districts, so you can see which zoning district that use can be in. But then when I get to the end of the table, it's blank. And so it doesn't have retail services, it doesn't have alcohol sales, which is something that you might want to get into in the future. I feel that since the specific district number 4, general district, allows any use other than dwelling, it should allow him to continue to operate his nursery, which is a retail sale. I guess I would think that the argument could be made, this is specific, and that would apply over the general. But then can I really say table 6.2 is a general statement of the uses? Because it's very specific in listing what the uses are. And then I have all those blank uses, especially when I get into, and what I'm concerned here, the retail sales. But I know that we have retail sales in the village. So this is one of the issues that I have with the UDO, which I raised earlier, which I'm going to get into later tonight, that there are lots of issues I think need to be resolved before we go a lot further. But I think with respect to this zoning change recommendation, is he going to be able to get to do what he wants to do? I'm thinking as a practical matter, yes, I don't know who's going to come in and fight it, but why were those retail sales and everything after that left blank?
Well, and the interesting thing is they are blank. There's not a dash, there's not a P, there's not an S. So those were just not finished. Because the earlier pages, if it's not allowed, it has a dash.
Yes.
So the fact that it's left blank does not necessarily mean that you can't do it. It just means that there was nothing specifically listed. Unlike some other ordinances that I've seen from other municipalities, they'll say if it's left blank, you cannot do that. But if there's a P or an S that it specifically says that, but I don't believe ours says, see, ours says prohibited uses. A, in quotes, dash indicates that the listed use type is not allowed within the respective zoning district unless it is otherwise expressly allowed by other regulations of this ordinance. So the ones that are left blank don't have a dash, they don't have a P, they don't have an S. So it's not prohibited.
But it was not permitted, it's not permitted.
It's not permitted.
I still feel, one, the general industrial is very specific and it allows everything other than residential. So I think that he's safe, but I wanted to raise that issue with you, Frank, and with Mary, you as attorney, to see if you guys were comfortable that this will give him what he's looking for. I think it is, but I wish I didn't have this issue.
I believe when you look at the 6.0, 7.01, it starts out district number 4, general industrial district. It says principal permitted uses, as you read. And then it has subject to the following, and it has A through I. And none of those would limit what he is using it for or intends to use it for. And I believe that you have to go with what is stated as what is a permitted use. And that is, again, any use except a structure used for dwelling purposes, provided it complies with the following. The fact that we have a chart that is incomplete, I don't believe the chart overrides the written language of what the general industrial district is. So that my interpretation would be, I would go with what's written there.
Then maybe the chart's just a
And the
summary.
chart is a summary.
Okay.
And I think we need to investigate to see if we had a completed chart that somehow was not submitted with the original ordinance. And we just need to we need to adopt that.
And I agree with you, I just thought I should raise it for this one because it could affect him.
Right, no, and
I think that he's pretty safe with it, but I wanted to raise it here and then I'll probably raise it again later. So having raised that, I have no further comments about this request for pre-annexation and the district for which he wants to be if he's annexed. And then that district would apply from this point on with respect to his property, correct? So.
Correct. So his property would be designated that, and
And he can do anything that our general industrial district allows for.
correct.
So he's no longer limited by his county uses, he has our uses now.
Correct. And the other thing that would apply is with this pre-annexation agreement is any building permits would also be controlled by the village. So if he goes to add any structures or modify what he has, he would have to come through the village building official, not the county.
Will that trigger the other possible things in the UDO with respect to pavement of parking and buffer zones and such? And one thing we talked about earlier, we were talking about our last meeting, the outdoor storage, which,
He's not building though.
No, he's not
You know,
building
if he's
anything. so-
building, then yes.
right, so if he built, so that would be something he needs to know. If he was to expand his building, that would then trigger all those things of the UDO with respect to paving, with respect to landscaping buffer, with respect to outdoor storage.
Unless he requests a variance.
So now he would still be under the 1957.
Well, no, he wouldn't, he's not under the 1957 because he wasn't in the village before the UDO was adopted.
Okay.
He's coming in and he's under the UDO, but we can't make him change what he has to be compliant with the UDO. He's coming in what he has and we're just changing the zoning, but we're not gonna make him update everything to be compliant with the UDO.
Until he would come into.
Until he comes in to make a change in his building or something else.
Okay,
Right, likewise, if what he has somehow isn't compliant with the 1957 zoning ordinance, we're not making him change it because he's already there. It's only if he goes to do something,
okay.
then he would be subject to it.
And then, so that I know how it would work, if someday he was to become adjacent to the village and then be annexed, would that trigger these other regulations or, so that won't even trigger?
No.
It's only when there's a change in the structure there or the use,
I think we use the word substantial change.
substantial
Right.
change?
Right.
Okay,
I know with some of the buildings in town, they don't have to do certain things unless they change more than, if they have more than 50% of the building size, then they have to update. So again, there's certain requirements that you then have to come up to the current code. But until then, if you don't do anything, you don't have to change anything.
Because their grandfather did.
okay. Having heard that, I guess I personally am comfortable with recommending the change to the, not a change, but a pre-annexation agreement, which would bring him in and give him general industrial district zoning, district number 4. That recommendation would be saying contingent upon getting waivers from the property owners within 250 feet, you say, Mary?
Yes.
Would this action have any adverse or substantial impact on the neighboring properties should they decide to seek out a pre-annexation agreement? Or are we restricting them or backing them into this change?
I don't think so, because they could come in at the appropriate zoning classification, and given the character out there, that's really what you have. I mean, there is some residential there, but other than the people who live on the other side of that road that goes down towards the gas, I think there's 2 houses there. Everything else is heavy industrial right in there.
Right, it's sort of across the street or just down around the curve, there's the homeowner but their home sits way back, probably a quarter mile off the road, and they raise llamas and that type of thing, so I don't think it really, would impact them. And we're not changing the zoning to allow a new use, to allow a new business to be there. This business has been there obviously for decades.
And I think you said right now, the county has it as heavy industrial,
Correct.
and we're bringing them in as general industrial.
So that would
it's
be-
very similar.
That would be our closest designation to what the county currently has.
Actually just opens up his uses much more, his permitted uses.
And the other area, businesses are mostly heavy industrial.
Does anybody else have any comments or discussion? Is there a motion with respect to his application for a zoning classification and a pre-annexation agreement?
I would move that we approve a zoning map amendment to change the zoning for his property from the county heavy industrial to the village district number 4, which is general industrial district, and subject to the
Neighbors and consent from the,
consent from the neighbors.
within 250 feet. And that's a recommendation of the village board, correct, to change the zoning.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Irv Koenig. Can we have a roll call vote, please?
Everett,
Yes.
Eubank,
Yes.
Coney,
Yes.
McDougal,
yes.
Flucker,
Yes.
Pitney.
Yes.
And then I can tell you that just discussing about those blank pages in the UDO, I have kept,
Pass that right now.
oh, I'm sorry.
Let the record show that this passed by unanimous vote. Thank you.
Sorry. I just wanted to let you know that with the UDO, I have kept every draft from every meeting, so I can go back and look and see if there was something that somehow addressed these and or didn't.
And that brings us to the draft solar ordinance. I could just have a minute to organize myself. I guess it doesn't really bring us to that yet. I've got to go back to approving some minutes. I can just have a moment. Okay, is anybody not ready? Okay, next matter on the agenda is to approve the minutes of the December 5th, 2022 public hearing. Everybody have a copy of it?
Yes.
Is there any discussion?
Make a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
Is there a second?
Second,
Second.
Thank you. Roll call vote, please.
Flucker,
Yes.
Everett,
Yes.
Eubank,
Yes.
McDougal,
yes.
Coney,
Yes.
Pitney.
Yes.
Let the record show, the minute shows passed by unanimous vote. The next matter on the agenda is approval of the minutes of the February 27th, 2023 Planning and Zoning Board meeting. I have a few changes I would like to recommend on this. In the public hearing of rezoning of Cash Drive paragraph. Do you have this in front of you?
Don't, but let me go.
Okay, I see you reading. Mike, do you want a minute to finish reading it before I start?
No.
Okay, Herb, are you ready?
Yes.
I thought I saw you reading something.
I need the same place, go ahead.
Okay, in the paragraph starting with public hearing of rezoning of Cash Drive, the last line, I would ask that it be changed to motion carried on a unanimous roll call vote. A or N?
Motion carried on.
And
And unanimous. It sounds odd,
I know
but
it sounds weird, I know.
The second paragraph of the zoning text amendment, RTMP, further discussion, I would like to change of to about, so it would read further discussion about the appropriate zoning classification. On page 2, the third paragraph, which starts, a motion was made by Mr. Eubank. I would like that to read, to direct the village attorney to draft a resolution, so you delete propose the, insert draft a, resolution 4, delete the recommendation, so it would read draft a resolution for the village board with specific language to adopt the UDO, and it would just read as it continues there. In the sixth line, are you with me, Kelly? Okay, right after the highlighted village board, comma, change, delete she, insert to, and cross out the plural for send. So it would read, Mr. Eubank asked when Attorney Gazzano provides the resolution to the county, to the village board, comma, to send it to the zoning board as well. And then the last sentence, motion carried on an unanimous roll call vote. In the first paragraph under new business, the second line, delete the word in and insert from. So it would read minutes from July of 2019. In the second sentence, which would be on the third line, no further discussion was had on this matter and insert it. So it reads on this matter and it remains an open issue. Further in that paragraph where it says Mr. Eubank provided additional information on Winburn Sue's use of the property, comma, and that insert the pre-annexation agreement discussion and delete it. So it would read on Winburn Sue's use of the property and that the pre-annexation discussion was about the same time that Chief Martin was retiring. The last paragraph on that page, and correct me if I'm wrong with this, Frank, Mr. Eubank informed the board that I think it should be owner of Meridian Nursery has asked. I don't know of any other owner.
Mr. Eubank informed the board that the owner of Meridian Nursery
Has
asked.
It reads owners, and I don't think there's plural owners.
Right. Nope.
So change owners to owner and have to has. And in the last line,
It'd be of its property, of his property or of its property, rather than their.
Oh, there.
yeah, so there,
Oh,
so
yeah.
his, I was getting there.
Oh, okay.
And then on the last page, the first paragraph, last line of that paragraph, motion carried on and unanimous roll call vote of those present. And I would suggest that those changes be made. I'm willing to, take this discussion on this. This goes along with my request, I think at the last meeting or before, and then talking to Kelly. If it's not a verbatim transcript, the minutes are just general, I would like them to be more grammatically correct. I think it reads better and looks better, and so that was why I was changing. I think we should have unanimous vote so that we know it's just not a majority. I believe if there wasn't a center, you could probably say these approved and this one didn't, but just to make it clear is why I wanted unanimous.
And I agree, we want to have an accurate record of what was stated at the meeting.
Are there any other changes or additions?
I just had a question for clarification. Under public hearing, we have a public hearing for the special use and the zoning change to be held on March 27th, 2023 at 5:55. And then on page 3, a public hearing, another public hearing for the Meridian Road pre-annexation at the same time and the same date. So was it one public hearing with 2 topics? Or did we intentionally just schedule them both?
There was 2 public hearings set for the same time.
Okay.
So that, I guess we could have done 5:55 and 5:56. We just did not want to set one at 5:55 and then set another one at 6:15. And then if we're done in 5 minutes, we're sitting there with nothing to do, so we put them at the same time or one after the other.
Typically, it's like if you have a court hearing, you schedule 3, 4, 5 court hearings at 9 o'clock, and you take them as, you take one and then you finish it and you go to the next one, so that's why we did it that way.
Thank you.
And we used to separate them, and then we would sit twiddling our thumbs.
Right.
Right.
That's fine.
Any other discussion or questions?
I would make a motion to approve the minutes as amended.
Second.
Roll call vote?
Emmett,
Yes.
Eubank,
Yes.
Tony,
Yes.
McDougal,
Yes.
Whitney,
Yes.
Booker.
Yes.
Let the record show this passed by a unanimous vote. And if I could just have a brief recess. I need some water.
Okay, I'll be wrong. Okay.
Bill, can I have a copy of those too, so I can,
Will I pass it out?
yeah.
I got one, yeah. Yes.
Yes.
Side down.
Okay, next on the agenda is the draft solar ordinance. And Molly, let me just state one thing right now, and then I'll let you make a comment, okay?
Okay.
Irv and Dennis, I passed out 2 documents to everybody here. I'll get documents to you through Kelly. The proposed ordinance is very detailed and very long, so I was trying to figure out a way to try to organize our discussion a little bit. And so one document I passed out is our task. And our task is to collectively decide what we believe the provisions of an ordinance regulating the construction and operation of a quote solar farm end quote in the village should be, and to pass our recommendations onto the village board. To do this, I suggest we first identify and discuss the various major topics or matters that we collectively believe should be included in such an ordinance, and then ascertain whether we are generally in agreement with what the terms of those topics or matters should be. Then I suggest we go through the proposed ordinance section by section to reword any sections we think need to be changed, or draft language for anything that we believe should be added. And I listed 4 major topics, and then I gave a little brief comment of my personal comment about it, Molly. The first, the major topics that I think we need to talk about at the beginning, which village zoning classifications should commercial solar energy generation facilities be allowed to be built and operated in? I use that term because that's a statutory term in Illinois. It's in the property code, it's also in the county code. I will point out later, solar farms, I think, is a misnomer. Really, they are commercial solar energy generation facilities, and I think we should call them what they are. Second major point or topic, should commercial solar energy generation facilities be permitted uses, special permitted uses, or a combination of both, depending on the particular zoning classification in question? The fourth major topic, should the restrictions placed on commercial solar energy generation facilities vary based upon how close the subject property is to residential zoned property? The fourth major topic, should the village update its 2007 future land use plan before ascertaining where it is in the best interest to allow solar energy generating facilities to be constructed and operated? Some of the things that I think need to be considered about restrictions are proximity to residential zoned property, height of solar panels, fixed or tracking solar panels, number of panels, lighting, landscaping, fencing, screening, minimum or maximum allowable acreage. Instead of just going through the proposed ordinance section by section, I thought it might be advisable if we talk about these general things first to see if we have a meeting of minds, or we have a consensus, or we have a majority. And then once we know generally what we think this should consist of, then we go through the proposed ordinance section by section to see if we think any changes need to be made to specific sections. So that's how I was planning on proceeding, unless my board tells me they don't want to proceed that way.
Bill, I'll comment, and I kind of like how you set this out into the major topics, because I think it is important. You know, I took a look at what Mary put together, and Mary, I really appreciate you doing that. I know you looked at various ones and you tried to put together a comprehensive one, but sometimes when you look at that, it doesn't make a lot of sense in and of itself. You have to kind of decide, what do you want in that document? And, you can put in there 100 feet or 200 feet for distance, but, we really have to decide initially for zoning classification, and then initially, what do we want to do with where it should be located and how close to residential and that kind of thing. So I like Bill setting out various sections. And it's kind of how in this Illinois solar model ordinance, they kind of have the same thing. They have definitions and they have certain things to look at. And so I agree, it'd be nice to have a comprehensive discussion on just the topics. And then once we agree on maybe certain topics, then we say, how do we put that into the ordinance? Is it already in there? Do we need to modify the ordinance? That kind of thing. So I agree with the approach that Bill is taking. I think in my mind, it'll work better with that approach.
And I want to go agree with what Frank says. Merrick, you weren't told what to put in. When I worked for the county, it was easy. If somebody told you what they wanted in there, then you could draft what they wanted.
Right.
You had to make something up, not knowing what they may or may not want, and in all probability, not trying to put your own thoughts in there, just come up with something. So to me, that was kind of a good starting point, but you were not given any direction. And I think that this gets us towards a direction. And then the other thing, once we get over the major topics, I'd like to identify, there could be specific restrictions or qualifications that the rest of you may come up with that I haven't thought of. I think we need to identify those. So when we go through the proposed ordinance, are they in there? Now, a lot of what I mentioned on things to consider restricting are in the proposed ordinance. Some of them I agree with, some of them I have changes on. But if we just went through the ordinance and started looking at it in detail, I thought that we would get lost from the big picture. We'd be in the forest, we couldn't see the forest because of the trees. And I think we kind of got into that a little bit when we were going through the proposed ordinance change to rewrite the 1957 code to include the research technology and MP, manufacturing part. And once we got done with it, I wasn't sure any of us knew what we had done. And so I think if we can identify the major points, do we have an agreement or not? Do we have a consensus? And then when we go through the ordinance in detail, then we can do it slowly and make notes so we know exactly what we want to recommend or not if we have a consensus. And so that would be easier for Mary to draft. And it might be a thing that if we can get it clear, then Mary redrafts it, then we look at it again.
Right.
And then we know we have what we want.
And
So that is how I was planning on proceeding, Molly. Do you have any general statement you want to make to us before we get going?
Yeah, so I just kind of wanted to go through a little context of, why we're here and who we are as a company that I'm representing, and then kind of comment on some of those broad topics that you were just mentioning. So my name is Molly Snitcher. I'm legal counsel for Trajectory Energy Partners. We're an Illinois-based developer. Right now, we only have projects in Illinois, and we do a little bit of work in Maryland, but we are primarily an Illinois company. We have a couple projects in Rockford. We've worked with the Village of New Milford. We've worked with Poplar Grove. We're working with the Village of Roscoe as well to develop some projects. So we are very active in Winnebago County, Boone County to develop solar projects. And right now we have a lease on a property that is east of Falconer Road, a little bit north of Cunningham, and it's called Prairie South Solar. We held an open house for that in January. Obviously, we need the village's approval in order to move forward with that project. And as part of that, we've been, in discussions about, how do we get that zoning approval and how do we move forward with a zoning ordinance in Winnebago. And so we submitted some comments in November on the draft ordinance, and our comments aren't really intended to be based on our specific project, and we really don't want our specific project to be like as part of this discussion or consideration, because we understand that we are not the main subject of the solar ordinance, but we will be the ones who are abiding by it, and we're the type of entity that will be abiding by the ordinance going forward. So just kind of wanted to offer our insight in based on our experience dealing with a lot of different villages and counties in Illinois. So one thing I wanted to go through is just kind of our development process, just to give a little bit of background how it works. So we'll start by signing a lease, which we have on the property in Winnebago, and then we will go through the zoning process. After that, we get a building permit, and then we'll go to construction, operate the project, and then about 35 years later, we'll decommission it. As far as the zoning process,
Stop you right there. How many years later?
35.
Yeah.
Our leases are typically 35 years. It's 25 years, but with options to renew, essentially. And I can't speak for all companies how long that would be, but that's typical for our company and probably most that are out there. So essentially, what we would like you guys to kind of consider as you're looking at the specific requirements of the ordinance is what you would see as a zoning board in order to grant a special use permit or to permit the project to move forward, knowing that we do all of our on-site diligence once we get zoning approval. So we do a lot of like desktop diligence ahead of time. So we do like an EcoCat with the Department of Natural Resources. We'll do a wetlands study. We understand, floodplains, all of that. But we don't actually go out to the site and do, like, for example, the full drainage house survey until we get approval from the zoning board, because it doesn't make sense if, the zoning board doesn't approve the project and then we can't move forward with it anyway. So we do all of the formal site diligence at that point. So we just like you to consider that there's two stages. There's the permit process for special use, and then there's permit process for building permit, where we'll do a lot more of that specific technical information.
Okay.
And then the other thing I wanted to address is the areas where we are developing, or the districts where we are developing it. We do typically see that projects are developed in both agricultural and industrial, as a special use in agricultural and typically a permitted use in industrial. The Illinois siting bill that was recently passed, actually, I know it doesn't apply to you, but it is not allowed for any zoning boards in counties at this point to prohibit solar projects as at least a special use in agricultural or manufacturing or industrial districts. So just kind of wanted to go through that there's a lot of protections from the Department of Agriculture, from the Illinois Department of Agriculture that we go through both, and a lot of protections that we insert into our leases with landowners. Obviously, landowners want to be protective of their own land and future uses of that. And I can talk a lot more about that or answer any questions as you go through about the types of protections that exist there. And then as far as industrial districts, it's typically just a generally permitted use. But I would like to note that industrial districts kind of contemplate a lot more traffic, maybe dust, heavy machinery, or lighting. But after our project is developed and constructed, it essentially requires only operation and maintenance, maybe like once a month. It's continuously monitored remotely, but like no one's going there every single day. Or there's no workers that need to be out there. It's essentially just the project taking in the sun and adding electricity to the grid. So essentially, I'm here to answer any questions if you have any about solar in general or how the projects operate, about the zoning process in other counties or villages, if you have any specific questions or anything like that. But obviously it's your conversation and happy to participate if you'd like, but otherwise I will leave it to you.
Okay, I know that if we get that far tonight, there are some specifics that, if you were the attorney who put the comments and changes in, I have questions about what's meant by it. I would be glad to have you participate to that point, but I personally would like it to stay at that point as opposed to getting into a discussion of what we think we should do or not do with respect to the zoning. If the other members disagree with me, speak up.
And Molly, thank you for staying on and giving us your thoughts. And I appreciate what you initially said when you started speaking, in that you represent Trajectory, but you're not here necessarily to interject what Trajectory wants in the ordinance. You're here to give us some insight as to what you're seeing in other ordinances. And I think that's important, that, what you're trying to do is just to say, hey, this is what I've seen, this is what it might work like, so that we might have an idea, because you're more involved with that. And it does make a difference to me knowing that you're not trying to say, well, Trajectory wants this, Trajectory wants that. You're more saying, think about this, and this is maybe, how it would work. And that's the stage that we're at. And Bill, I also agree, it's something where we as a board need to discuss this. And yes, we're a public board, so people can listen to what we have to say, but it is the public board that should be discussing and all that. We then can ask Molly or any other interested person that's virtual, what do you think? Or, do you have any other insights? So I think we would use Molly as, like we've done before. We sent a copy of the ordinance and she responded and she gave us some feedback, and maybe we can ask some more, but I think.
If something comes up, if she's not a full participant of the six members.
Right, so, Molly, you would not be sitting here and giving input as freely, but yes, we would likely, want you to see what's going on, because we do work with other entities and we're doing other ordinances to get their input as well.
Does anybody else have any comments at this point?
The only thing that I would say is, I totally agree, and I like how Bill has laid this out. And any time that I am given a task to say we need something to work from, it's always a fruit basket approach, as I call it. And if you come back and you say, oh, I hate that, or we don't want anything like that, then I've done my job, in my opinion.
Yes.
I don't take anything personally, so never feel that I do, because I don't. I put it in there and I say, this is what such and such did or didn't do. And that way, it's just for thought-provoking purposes. And
It's hard to start with a blank page.
exactly. And
We
then-
are now starting with something, it's easier to start with something than a blank page.
And the goal is to try to start with something that is too much versus not enough in it, just to give you the topics to think about. And then if you say, we don't need that at all, we're a small community, perfect. Then just throw it out. Or what about this? We didn't consider this, we put it in. So I think this is really helpful now that Bill has it broken down this way, that we can see what's specific to what we want.
All right. Any other comments, Dennis, or? I guess if not, I'm gonna start with the elephant in the room, which is really number 1 topic and number 4 topic. Which village zoning classifications should commercial solar energy generation facilities be allowed to be built and operated in? The proposed ordinance will allow it in all classifications except.
Sorry, didn't mean to throw away.
Okay.
Except residential. This would allow such facilities to be built adjacent to and across the street from residential properties. I suggest that such facilities only be allowed in District 4 General Industrial and in District 8 RTMP. These are classifications in which high-intensity uses are expected to occur. If you go to our UDO, interestingly, electric power generation facilities are only permitted uses in District 8. So if we were to allow them in other things, we're going to change the UDO. The village is already in its UDO, I think, said that this is where electric or solar or electric generating facilities should be. I don't think it should be close to residential. I think there should be restrictions that if it's within so many feet of residential, there's these restrictions. And that would go towards the fencing, the screening, the height of the panels, so forth and so on. But I would also point everybody to the future land use map that we got at the last meeting. And in particular, the property that Directory is looking at is zoned residential. The land use plan in 2007 is for it to be residential, and it's intended to be residential all the way over to West Ridge.
I would like to jump in. We shouldn't be focusing on trajectory. This is not what the discussion is about. The discussion is about a solar ordinance.
Okay.
We first have to get a solar ordinance together and decide where do we want it, what zoning districts do we want it to be? What areas of the zoning do we want it to be in our use map? But I think to try and say trajectory and that parcel, we will never come to an ordinance if we're trying to say that we're having a company moving to a particular parcel and we're going to be drafting an ordinance around that. We need to draft the ordinance first as to how we want it, and then we decide if trajectory fits that ordinance.
Right. And I understand what you're saying, and that's fair. The reason I got into that is part of what I'm concerned with is allowing it agricultural, and people can easily look. And that's something I would recommend to the village board. You look at that as being a farm. You look at that as being agricultural. But the plan is not for it to be agricultural. And I don't think it should be an agricultural property. I don't think that agriculture uses is really I can't think of a better word, I'll say proper. It's not improper for the village, but villages do not expect, and they do not expand, and they don't have property that we're going to keep this as a farm. It's designated as agricultural because the village expanded, and it's agricultural when you expanded, and it's kind of in a holding pattern until you get the more municipal use for it. Municipalities do not set aside land for agricultural purposes, for the traditional agriculturists, as opposed to a county where, yes, you've got your agricultural, you keep it as agricultural. So solar farms, I'll use that word now, even though I don't think it's appropriate, but it's shorter. Out in the county, I can understand where agricultural zoning might be an appropriate place for it. I don't think it is for the village, because I see it more as a holding classification. And if it's just going to be a holding classification, and getting back to trajectory, and I'm not focusing in on them, but it does kind of apply when you look at the land use. And if it's going to be a 35-year project, you've just tied something up for 35 years as opposed to having it available for what your plan is. So should you have a plan? Should the village board be looking at where they want solar farms to be if solar farms are going to be here? Should it be down by 20? Should it be in these areas of red as opposed to yellow? If you're going to just look at what's farmed now and say, well, we can turn, it's really just being used for agriculture, so it's an appropriate place. I don't think it is. And I'm wondering if the village should first look at its long-range plans before it decides what zoning classifications it wants. And I think the main problem I have with it is because of the agricultural, but I don't see it really being as traditional agricultural. So I'll stop at this point to see, to hear what anybody else has to say.
So my thought is for the village to have a new zoning study, that'll take too much time. We already have the one, it does show, and I think it properly shows where the village sees the growth. Yes, the village does need to look at that and determine, do we need to make any changes to what was determined back in 2007? And now that solar is an option, do we want to look at any of the categories going solar specifically? But I don't think that we need to have the village first adopt a new plan and use of property before we can do a solar ordinance. I will say that in reading various ordinances and reading the model Illinois ordinance, the model Illinois ordinance talks about the large scale solar energy system, it uses a solar energy system, a community scale solar system. So it does make these categorizations that we might want to use rather than a solar farm. I believe that our district number 8, our district number 4, so general industrial district and the RTMP are appropriate to have solar. I also believe agricultural is appropriate. The county allows for it in agricultural. We as a village don't have a lot of agricultural land in the village, but as Bill said, it doesn't mean that we can't acquire agricultural land. And to the east, to the north, to the south, and to the west of the village limits, directly next to it, we have lots of farmland. And it would not be unforeseeable to have property annexed into the village that is currently agricultural, that we would want to keep agricultural and possibly have solar. I don't like the idea of taking in agricultural land and having to change it to industrial under our current industrial setting, because that means we can have biofuel plants. We can have very high, heavy industrial things coming in under our general industrial, and I'm very concerned about that. I like the RTMP because that restricts certain things that can be there. Yes, it's more for some of the heavy industrial, but not all of the biofuel and all those other things that we may have concerns with. So in my mind, I think we should allow for agricultural, for general industrial, and for the RTMP to have solar. And yes, we typically get agricultural, we bring it in that way, and its intended use at some point in the future may be residential, it may be general business district, it may be general industrial, it may turn to that. But who's to say that it's going to do that in the next 35 years? And so if somebody comes in agricultural and says they want to have solar for 35 years, I'm not against it in agricultural. I'd rather have it stay agricultural and have solar than to change it to heavy industrial or industrial, have them do solar, or then say, you know what? The landlord's gonna say, I'm not gonna do the solar anymore. I'm gonna go and I'm gonna find some big industry to come in here, and you've already changed it to industrial and I can put anything there I want. And that's my concern is I want to allow the ability under agricultural to have this so we can have solar or we can have agricultural. To me, I think we need to have that ability. I have noticed in the city of Rockford that most of the places where they have the solar is going to be where they had industrial, where they had buildings, where they had businesses that are no longer typically in business, and they have this land, these buildings where they can put these things. That's fine. We don't typically have that here in the village. We don't have an old industrial park that we're trying to renovate to something newer where we can put solar in. We have a smaller square footage, a smaller area. We are going to have a lot more residential contacting a lot of our business area. It may be that our current village, where we have it, we don't want to have a large solar energy system. It may not work for the village, but so I think I would add agricultural in addition to what Bill is saying. That's my main concern. And I don't think we need to have a new land use plan to move forward with the solar ordinance. So those would be my views on those two particular issues. I have thoughts of how close we have it to residential. So, you know, when we get to that point of where we have the zoning and where we have residential and where should we have a solar farm, solar system, you know, maybe most of the ones we're looking at are 150 feet, some are 150 feet from the roadway, some are from the property. Maybe we have a further distance, you know, I don't know. That's a different section that you're talking about.
That's when we get into the specifics.
Right. But I think for right now, you know, those would be my points, that we would add agricultural to allow for the solar.
I would say two things. I would say that I agree with Bill that solar is, it's not a farm in any traditional sense of the word. And so I don't think that it applies to agriculture. It would take some change, I think, from agricultural to something. Because I don't see it fitting in the definition of agricultural. Second, I say that it's going to be very, very tough to marry it with residential. It's not, I don't see them as being really unappealing, but in a residential setting, it's going to be a very, very sensitive marriage, putting it in close proximity to residential.
My counter argument to it's not part of a farm would be.
If could I stop you just for a second there?
Yeah.
Because I was gonna do the same thing, but I thought we should give everybody a bite of the apple like we would at a public hearing. Because you and I are gonna be on, we know where each other stands on it. But we need to know where the rest of the committee, we need to know if there's a consensus before we get into the particulars. And so that's why I wanted to start with the broad one first. And I think you agree with me, this is the elephant in the room. And it really comes down to, is agricultural zoning a proper place in the opinion of the zoning committee for solar farms to be constructed and operated? So I would ask, did any of the other three members want to give some input? What do you think? And we're not voting, we're just talking about this to find out where everybody is, to see if we can come together with a consensus.
I agree that with Frank, that there should be, the solar should be part of the agriculture too. There are places where they are commingling, and that they are continuing to use the solar fields for agriculture, whether it be livestock, whether it be certain crops. And I would just assume, especially if we're going to have something this close to the village, I would rather see this to be taken care of, seeded down in that situation, other than having it all paved over to make it look more industrial.
My opinion is that I grew up on a farm, and so I'm somewhat hesitant to see farmland change, but it's a reality, and obviously it's going to change. It could be, as Dennis just said, partially paved over and houses put on it. So that, you know, in this instance, there's open land around us, but it's all agricultural land. This type of facility needs an open space. Well, not necessarily. In some cases, they're building small facilities on large parking lots, like a Walmart parking lot. I don't think we, as a village, have that type of thing to offer. So if we are going to allow this type of facility at all, I believe that it's going to have to be on open land, which is, of course, agricultural.
Riley?
Yeah, going along with, your guys' thoughts, I see that we, look into, seeking proper zoning for it, cause I don't know, to me, I don't know if it fits into agricultural, but, I mean, if proven differently, then I guess I, see it fit.
I would also like to add that looking down the road at when they do decommission, if it is already zoned industrial, then those residential areas around that, that's what they have to look forward to, is heavy industry or something like that coming in. Whereas if it is decommissioned, it's back to agriculture, it'd be much easier if we have to change that to some type of residential going that way, as opposed to moving from industrial back to residential.
And just to build on that, it's not we that change it, it's the landowner. And if the landowner already has it as industrial, the landowner can then look for a different tenant, that fits in there, and it can be anything. And we lose the ability to control it, whereas if it's agricultural, we would control the next business or the next thing that would come in there. So I feel it allows us to have a little more control over what's going on if we allow for an agricultural use. If it's currently agricultural, I don't want to change it to heavy industrial just to get the solar, because you have to take whatever else can come. It just isn't solar anymore. It can be anything that's heavy industrial or industrial. And that's my fear. I don't want to lose that ability. And even if you have a special use for solar and industrial, you don't need a special use to do other industrial things in industrial. And that's my concern.
And my take on what you three are saying is you're predisposing that the village has to have solar. The village doesn't have to have a solar farm.
We don't, but if we did, I would like the option to also have agricultural, because that's typically the type of land that's going to be brought forward. If we're going to use trajectory, that is farmland. It's zoned residential, but that's farmland. We can either have houses built there, we can change it to zone to have industrial there, and all of a sudden the property owner comes forward and says, we want to have industrial, we want to put solar. We grant the change of zoning, and then he says, I'm kicking trajectory off the lease, and I'm going to have now a heavy industrial business come in, and now the neighbors are going to be upset, but we have no control over it. I'd rather, if we're looking at something like that, zone it to agricultural with a special use for solar. And then if solar is done, if they want to bring it back to residential, they bring it back to residential. I'm not saying that I want solar to be there. What I'm saying is, if it's agricultural, we have more say in what's built there than if we were to change it to industrial.
But you don't have to have solar in the village. The counties have to have solar. The state legislature said that, but the counties have big agricultural areas. Municipalities don't. And I guess I would disagree with you. If the village wanted to have solar, and the appropriate place would be the light industrial, annex the property down by 20. That would be a good place to have the light industrial, and it's nowhere around any residential, and it's not infringing upon the residential.
And that may be the right place.
But, I guess the village, I think, needs to think, they don't have to have a commercial solar facility. They may run into, they're gonna have to address individual properties, because people are gonna want to put solar on their houses and on their yards. That they have to address, but unless they are already 100% in favor saying we have to have this, they don't. And so that's the first thing they should look at. And what is the village really gaining by putting a solar farm in? The electricity is not coming to the village. Electricity is going anywhere. The people who sign up for that solar, from what I was told at the open house, I can sign up to get my $20 a month discount by signing up for a solar farm in Carbondale. So it's really, what's the benefit for the village to put a large solar electrical generating facility in a small village, as opposed to individual solar farms? So that, I think, is the first issue. That is, this board going to recommend that they do that, or recommend they don't do it? But if they do, then here's restrictions we think you should put in, because then we could also recommend restrictions. If they were to put it in agricultural, I've got a number of restrictions I would recommend as to the height of the panels, or they're movable and stuff, if you can hear them. But you still have that initial, what do we recommend? And if we're at a 3-3, I guess the recommendation is 3 think you should have it, 3 think you don't, then we can get into the other.
Isn't the answer to why the village would want it is the fact that the tax revenue would be more?
I think it's very little more. And it goes down every year.
Property tax would be higher for a facility like this than for the agricultural land, correct?
It would be higher, but I don't think it's that much higher, especially when you look at the village's share of the tax rate.
But
Can I speak to that? The taxes are actually set by state statute, and often it's at least 1,000% increase in taxes.
Well, I know I asked some people about the house, they couldn't tell me. I know that they're based upon the megawatts. And I know that it goes down every year. You have to compare the tax revenue now versus the tax revenue if you bring it in. I think it's nominal. It's not like a huge tax revenue if you built a manufacturing park facility, which is going to bring in a ton of money.
Right. I mean, the village board is the one that would determine whether they want to have a solar farm, solar system, a large scale, small scale type of thing. I think as a zoning board, we are looking at an ordinance. We're looking at, if the village is going to have solar, what ordinance do we want? We're not debating whether we should have a solar ordinance or not. That's not what this board, I think, is tasked with. I think this board is tasked with developing a solar ordinance. In my mind, I don't want just one for large solar farms. I want a solar ordinance that's going to be for the houses, for if you've got a carport, you want to put it on your carport. If you've got a business, you want to put it in your business building. I want it for the small and the large. And I want it to address all of it to say, if we're going to have it in the village, this is what you have to comply with. It may be that we never will have a large solar producing system in the village because they may not be able to fit into what we're putting. They may not be able to put it far enough away from residential. That's for us to decide as to where we want to put it, but I don't think we should not have a solar ordinance. I think we need to have one, and I think we need to have a color cover large and small, and then we go from there and let the village decide if they want to have a business.
I guess I agree with that. It just should be in the agricultural. They could still have it in the industrial. All they got to do is, if they want it, make it industrial. You don't have to put it in a particular place. You don't have to worry about, well, we want to go ahead and let it be an agricultural, so we don't have heavy industrial out on Faulkner Road.
I guess I'm missing the importance of having it being general industrial or research and manufacturing technology park for solar. Why that's important to have it zoned that way.
Because I think it's going to create a buffer by other zoning. You're not generally going to have residential right next to heavy industrial.
But then
We're going to have business between them. And part of my recommendations in here would be, it would within so many feet, say 1,000 feet of residential, you can't see it. It's got to be landscape and such.
Then why can't we then say agricultural, if you have solar, has to have the same buffering as if you had solar and an industrial? Why can't we do it that way?
I guess I just don't think it's appropriate in agriculture because it's not an agricultural use.
But you harvest the sun. You are creating energy. We harvest corn to produce fuel. We are harvesting the sun to produce energy.
It is an electric power generation facility. It's not a farm. I suppose you and I can argue about this forever, but I don't know if we have a consensus on the classifications. You know, should we go to all the restrictions?
Let me jump in here. What are the restrictions of buffering with industrial? Are they already in place?
We have that industrial can only be within, has to be so many feet away from the residential. We do have that in our UDO. So we could do the same with solar. Wherever you put solar, it has to have the same or more, depending upon what your.
But why wouldn't we encourage this type of development in the area that already has the buffering and restrictions?
I'm not against putting it where the village owns land where it's general industrial. I would gladly have it in that 8 to 12 acres. But the problem is, again, I don't want to take certain agricultural land and have to zone it industrial just to have a solar facility.
But that's like, you don't have to have a
No, but if you want a solar facility, if you want to allow a solar business to come to the village, then you have to have it general industrial. And I don't want to have to do that because you can never change it back to anything else without the property owner's consent and desire.
But you shouldn't have to worry about that if you zone it, if the land is properly zoned as industrial. If you put industrial land where industrial should be, it should be industrial. It shouldn't be a misuse of the agricultural, in my opinion.
But why is it a misuse?
Because it's not agricultural. It's not an agricultural use. It's a industrial use.
Why is it industrial?
Because you're generating electricity. That to me is very industrial. It's not growing corn. It's not raising crops.
To me, there's less aggravation and agitation to the general public with having a solar farm than having a dairy farm, a hog farm, a corn or soybean farm. Because when you are out there and you are basically taking the corn out of the ground, you have all the silage, you have all of the other stuff that's coming out and all of the dust. And let me tell you, my car gets covered in dust when I'm going past the grain bins on Swift Street and Main Street. When they're putting in all of the grain and taking it out, it is covering it would cover the house next door, and they always complain. So to me, a solar farm does not create dust, does not create noise. We don't hear the tractors and the combines at 2 in the morning when they're out there all night. We don't have the semi-tractor trailers going back and forth up and down the roads hauling grain. We have none of that. So really a solar farm is a very good, quiet neighbor without smell, so we don't have dairy or hog problems. So if we have agricultural, and I say we have solar on it, it's less intrusive on the neighborhood than if we have a true farm doing farming operations.
And I think the village is misusing and, what's the word I want? I don't want to say this word, but they're almost raping the agricultural to put it in there. If it's a proper place to have it, make it industrial, because that's what it is. But I think right now we can go ahead and we're 3-3, so we do not have a consensus on the zoning classifications. We could, if we end up that way, which I don't think it's gonna be tonight, because we're gonna have to have a redraft. I don't think we're gonna get through everything tonight. When we pass it, I do agree with you, we need to pass a recommendation onto the village board, because that's our job, that's our function. But we can also word the zoning classifications, we're split, and some reasons why.
And I think that's very appropriate, because, I mean, you make a good point. If we do it industrial, you only want an industrial place, so that if it is converted to something else, you have to worry about it. So, I mean, that's what can be put in the recommendation to the board, is if we just have our, district number 8 and number 4, this is why. Because if they stop using it for solar, it's in an area already where we don't
It's
mind
appropriate for those other
something else
uses,
coming
for
along.
heavy intensity uses.
Right, and for those of us that want agricultural too, we would have in there some words as to why we think agricultural would be a good option, so that in case it wanted to be developed for something other than industrial, once they're done, if it's in a particular place where we don't want industrial, but that's where we can put both.
We can put that together, it's just gonna take time.
Right.
And I think that, that takes care of the first and the last one.
And I think,
I need some more water. I get this. Go ahead, Mary.
and I think it's good to at least consider those, because people may disagree, but we know right now that counties are regulated as to where they can limit solar farms based on the new legislation. I, for one, am not convinced that the government won't ever come in and try to regulate it in municipalities as well.
Yeah.
So, right now, the counties can't say that they can't limit it and say you can't be in agricultural. So we should at least be prepared, I think.
And can I give some context just on like the general types of solar farms that exist? There's 2 types. One is community solar, and one would be large scale utility scale solar. Community solar is the type of projects that are essentially 2 to 5 megawatts. Those would never be more than 40 acres. Large scale utility projects, those would be, in partnership directly with the utility or something that goes directly onto the grid. And those are different types of projects that would maybe be hundreds of acres. And those are probably, you may have driven past those. But community solar is a very different type of development that is typically much smaller.
Well, we'll get into sizes later.
Yeah. And
I think we're 3-3, and I think that when we get to the point of a recommendation of a solar ordinance and what we think should be in it, the things that we do disagree on, we should word and be fair to each side to present to them as a board. Now, as individuals, it's completely different, but as a board, we should have a fair representation, and we do not have a consensus on what classifications would be appropriate, other than we have a consensus that the general industrial and the number 8 would be appropriate. We do not have a consensus on the agricultural, and we could explain that in writing when we pass it on through.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess, the next thing we have here, should they be special permitted uses, permitted, or a combination of both? if we were going to have agricultural, I think that has to be a special use.
Right.
If we were gonna go with the other two, I don't know. Should one of them be a permitted use? Because it's already a permitted use in the UDO for the number 8. So should it be a special use in the number 4, industrial? But then, again, the UDO needs to be changed because general industrial allows everything. So that's where I still have a problem with the UDO has some holes in it or has some inconsistencies that need to be fixed. I'm a little uncomfortable proposing another zoning ordinance when the UDO has these holes in it. I don't see the urgency in it. The government's not requiring us to put commercial solar generating facilities in. I see an urgency on individual lots because I can see people wanting to do it and I don't know that they're prohibited from doing it. So I think that's where the focus of this committee and the board should be. I'm willing to go along with everything else, but I'd like you to think about that because I think we should do that first and this second, because this is not dealing with the individual lots. This is only dealing with the big commercial. And is it just because you have somebody who wants it done as opposed to what the village wants? I think this is being driven by an outside. We want to put it in here, so we got to draft an ordinance to get it done, as opposed to the village board looking at what do we have to address? They have to address the individual. Can they put it in their backyards? Can they put it in their house? Can they put it in their garage? That's where I think the focus should be. And when we get done with this, if I get a consensus, maybe that's the recommendation we pass through. But with respect to permitted or special permitted uses, a special permitted use allows you to put a bunch of restrictions on, but I don't know that we would want the village to pass a permitted use without a number of restrictions in there anyway.
Right.
And if you have your restrictions in your ordinance anyway that you want, that might be sufficient, because we not get in trouble if we've got a lot of specifics on, it's a permitted use here as long as you do 1, 2, 3 through 10. But then somebody else comes in on a special permitted and they do the 10, but now you're gonna want 12 or 13. Could that cause us a problem in court?
And what,
If we've gotten really specific, we're just adding new things. Is there a concern that we're adding things just to stop them without having a good reason? Because we already delineated what our good reason restrictions are. And so if you can't have just a permitted use without a lot of restrictions, maybe it should all be special. And maybe that's why a lot of them go to all special use. But if we just use special uses, are we opening up problems with, he got this, so I should be able to get the same thing? Because it's not written out, it's all kind of subjective. What do you think about that, Mary? I mean, is there legally a better way to protect what the village does? Is it just to put it as restrictions and a permitted use, and so it's there for everybody to see? Or is it better to have the restrictions that can vary, and you come up with new ones on special uses? Which could we be challenged and lose more easily?
Well,
Does that make sense to you?
yeah, no, I see exactly what you're saying. I think if you have it, that it has to be a special permitted use, then you are more able to tailor it to the land and justify it. Because as you know, you have to go through the provisions that we were just reading for a special permitted use. And then you can justify it as to that piece of land. If you do it as permitted uses, that's, to me, that's only if you think it's pretty much going to be across the board for all of this type of land, this is all we're ever going to need.
So you think it's more defensible if somebody
That's
challenges that we could win, in which case you legally think we should have all of it be special permitted and have none of them be just a principal permitted.
And I think that's what we've seen in a lot of them, that they've got a special.
I disagree a
permitted use.
little bit. I think we need to talk more about the opportunity to have some permitted. And again, I'm looking at the Illinois model solar ordinance just as an example, but
Now, is that for municipalities and counties, or is it just a general?
it's a general one
Both.
through Minnesota, Illinois, and I believe Wisconsin. It's a 3-state model ordinance, and they've adopted it. They're using Illinois.
Municipalities or counties or both?
It's more for municipalities, but it's for rural municipalities and for, more urban. And they say that some of these things you'll want to take out if it's more rural, some you'll want to take out if it's more urban. So they have a scope of things that you can consider, and then you just take what you like from it. But one of the things that they have in here, it's permitted use for the rooftop solar, for like each individual home is a permitted use. Under residential.
Guys,
Yeah, I thought he was talking commercial. I mean.
So,
yeah, because I thought because this is just commercial.
well, again,
And should we have one that has both, or should we do the individual first? And as a,
I think.
I think we should do the individual first, because that's where the village's pressure is gonna come from, because those people have more of a right to put something in.
We already have people that are putting up solar, so we're already allowing them to do it, but we don't really have something in place.
But do you have a way to stop them?
Yes. Our electrical inspector and our building inspector have stopped certain ones from being affixed because they were not within certain standards. But I know our electrical inspector requested several years ago about ground array, because we didn't really have.
Because I'm
anything
gonna
to
ask you
talk
about that next.
So my thought is, again, not only should we be dealing with a commercial, but I think we could do it. You should be doing a comprehensive one that's commercial and residential.
But what our proposal right now is totally just commercial. So are you recommending that we Mary put together something that has both?
I think we can add, and that's what I was looking at earlier today, was trying to add residential to this current ordinance. And it doesn't have to be a huge change, but we just add residential in another portion. And what I'm seeing is for community type solar that Molly brought up, so the community solar, which is a little bit smaller than the large scale solar, the community solar is generally permitted when you look at industrial. So our number 8 and number 4, we could have it as permitted. We would have just in our ordinance certain things,
Certain requirements, size, size of the panels,
Yes, all
acreage,
that-
blah,
all
blah,
that
all that, yeah.
Where you get the special use is if you have certain special districts, like you might have a historical district, there might be, in the city of Rock would be a historical right next to industrial. There you may have certain requirements where you want a special use because you may want to have special factors, special things that you want to do in that area. We don't necessarily have that. When we do the large scale, I think that's where you might want to look at having them come for a special use, because that.
All large scale?
Right, all large scale, because it's a.
Well, and a community is a large scale, right?
Right.
Okay.
Well, no, you have community solar is typically anywhere from, I think Molly was saying, maybe 40 acres or lower, and here it talks about 20 acres or less. If you're, so if you're talking a larger one, maybe bigger than 40 acres, whatever your delineation is, that one, I think you might want to look at a little bit more special use, because it may have special different things for each type of project.
Can I go?
Yeah, we're likely not going to have.
Because I don't see the difference in that. Be it 20 or 40, those are commercial. I think you've got two things. You've got the individual residents or a business that want to put a solar panel on their ground or on their property. So the individual property, small property owner. Then you've got the commercial. That's, I don't think you got 3, I don't think you've got 20 and 40. I think it's individual versus commercial. The individual ones are generating electricity for their own house.
Mm-hmm.
The commercial is generating and selling. I don't see any sense in having a big commercial or small commercial ordinance. I think it's one or the other. And I think any ordinance that we pass might have the same thing, might have both the individual residential, business or whatever panels for that property, and then the commercial. But I don't see the sense in any more than those two categories.
So whether it's 5 acres or 5,000 acres, you wouldn't see a differentiation.
To me, they're commercial.
So we'd have the same.
If they're allowed in the area, they're allowed in the area. The small ones, I think the village should be looking at that first, because can the village right now stop somebody from putting a panel up in their backyard?
Right.
As long as it meets the setbacks.
Mm-hmm.
What about a property with 2 lots? Your house is on one lot and you fill the other one up with panels.
Right.
But that's still, if you use it for your own house, to me, that's an individual, that's not a commercial project.
Well, I couldn't, you say it couldn't be.
And maybe we gotta do that. You know, I've been looking at, the lot across from you. Is that big enough that somebody would commercially do it?
But what is it zoned? You know, you have to look at what is it zoned, and whatever it's zoned, if it's residential zoning, then we have certain requirements under residential. Maybe it has to be affixed to a structure. Maybe you can't put it on the ground. Maybe we don't want to allow ground array because it looks
Right.
horrible.
And that's where I think we should be focusing right now.
I mean,
and the village should be looking at first, as opposed to this commercial ordinance.
well, to me, I think we need to address it all. I think it needs to be addressed all at once, because yes, we do have a business that is interested in this. That's what's spurring this. But that's what spurs all of our actions. Somebody either doesn't like something or they want something that we don't have, and we have to do something to either allow it or not allow it. And so we're more reactive. So whether this business is successful in moving forward or not, we still need to have something in place. And I think we need to have residential and commercial, and why not do it with the same discussion? I don't think the definitions are going to change between residential and commercial. I don't think we're going to really change how it's going to be displayed.
Well, I think it's gonna change a lot.
We're still going to
But
see.
right now, like, if we look at the UDO, one of the comments I'm gonna make when we get to screening and stuff, we already have a UDO that says if you're within 300 feet of residential, you cannot see the mechanical on the roof, and you can't see the electrical boxes or whatever units on the ground. In somebody's backyard, you're gonna see that. You know, there's really, I don't know how they're gonna cover it up so their neighbor, one way or the other, doesn't see it. And so then there's different factors. I about what's appropriate for the individual, how to define it right now, but I think we all know what I'm talking about. And I think that's where we should get a focus, and we're not even thinking about that right now in this ordinance. And is the village given the direction to come back with a commercial solar farm ordinance, or is this more driven by staff? You know, have they dictated down, here's what they want, or are they sitting back knowing that it's happening, thinking, yeah, we gotta address it sometime? Should we backtrack a little bit and put together a comprehensive one, like you're saying, which it addresses both of them? And I think there's gonna be lots of different considerations and factors that have to play into what an individual puts on his house or his backyard versus a commercial one. And we can go ahead and define it by size too. How many lots or how many acres is one thing, or how many panels is one thing versus the other. And we can still go through the rest of the stuff that I have here, the comments, but what do we think should be the restrictions for solar panels on individual small lots? Let's say a business like General Dollar or a house or whatever. We don't have, we'll have to eventually define it, but I think everybody knows what I'm talking about now. What should those restrictions be? Should they all be rooftop? Should you allow them on the ground? Do they have to be landscaped or screened so they can't be seen from what, can they be seen from a second floor of a neighbor? What factors should we be looking at and coming up with? Should we be looking at those right now? Also,
do you want to just move forward with the commercial right now?
do you have it, or did you turn him off?
No, I didn't. I was about to, but he
Just doesn't he have a line through, or that just means he can't speak?
He's on mute, so that means we can't.
Oh, he took it off. Okay, so we can't talk to him.
So so he can hear us, we just can't hear him.
Oh, okay.
So, I'm fine with just moving forward with commercial. If we want to just move forward with this and get this done, I'm fine with that. But in my mind, we should be addressing residential. And I can take the time between now and our next zoning board meeting to look at how residential would fit in with this ordinance that Mary drafted. Because I think I could find some things to put in there, and I can, talk to Mary about it to see if it makes sense. I don't want to take us off the rail right now from doing what we're doing and moving forward with commercial. I don't want to derail us from that. I want us to move forward.
But why is there a hurry to get this done?
2 reasons. One, we have an interested resident, owner of property, and we have a business that's interested in it. So in my mind, that is something that, to me, we should be looking at trying to move forward with having this in place. So if we have other interested parties that are bringing forth solar, we already have something in place.
Okay, and I think I know where you and I are.
Yeah.
And you know where you and I are. We need to know what the consensus is, because I don't want you or I to run it. I want the consensus to dictate where we go with it.
And if, before you get any further consensus, if I could just say, when I began this, or when we had the discussion was to have for residential or personal and to have a commercial. But when I went to the ordinances, they were so confusing, I couldn't understand it. And I thought, I don't know that the Joe Q Public is gonna understand. If I want this on my house, what are my rules gonna be? So at a minimum, I would, and then of course I went to this because we had some interest in this, and that's what I focused on. If we're going to somehow incorporate it into this, I would just suggest a different section. Just so that people then they want it on their houses, they know if you're a house, this is what's required. Rather than having to read through all this other stuff that has nothing to do with them. Because that's what I was finding in the combined ordinance.
Is there an appropriate existing ordinance that covers additions, structures, signage, that would simplify the process of adding the residential component?
I don't think it's that direct that we would have it. And I know I had previously gotten from Paul Happick, our electrical inspector, some of the things that he would like considered in a residential ordinance. But like I said,
because they were running into those issues with them up on the house, and they had to make certain decisions as to what was allowable and not allowable, because we didn't have anything. The second thing is the ground array. How would they permit that? Would they allow it? And we don't have anything. And to me, I've seen it personally with my daughter's house she looks out her backyard and she sees the ground solar array and it looks awful. You know, they didn't buy the property to look at a solar array system, they bought it to look at the green areas out behind their house until their neighbors put that there. And there was nothing in the HOA or anything else that prohibited them from putting that there, and the county didn't prohibit it from putting there, so it's there. And so that's what we have to decide is, in our village, do we want to have ground array in a residential or a business setting for personal use? Or do we want to just be up on the building? Do we want to have it, if it's on the ground, to where you can't see it? But heck, if you're up on the second floor, unless your trees are 20 feet tall, you're gonna be seeing these.
I guess that's what I'm thinking about, that's what I'm thinking about the agriculture, it's the same thing.
Well, yeah.
It's the residential, but
Yeah.
if I go back to my main points.
Yeah.
Do we have a consensus on whether everything should be special use or some classification should be permitted or special? After listening to Mary, I'm inclined to say, let's make them all special use, like.
If it's commercial, yes, I agree.
You can't bifurcate them.
Well, you could, you know, if we're talking just commercial now. Do we want to have the, as the UDO says, you can have it in the District 8. So that's a permitted use, not a special permit.
Exactly.
So do we keep that as a permitted and then have restrictions in that as to what they have to do? And then the district, general industrial has to be special permitted. And then if the village board goes agricultural, I think we all agree that that should be special. There's just not a consensus on if that's inappropriate. And so I'm just trying to get my four main ones. And so do we have a consensus on the special and permitted use?
I'm just thinking out loud.
Yeah.
When we have a special use, it puts a burden on our zoning board to listen to the proposal, to determine and be experts on whether what they're proposing is appropriate or not. We have to then decide for each project, is what they're proposing appropriate? I think it's easier for the prospective business or property owner to look at our ordinance in advance if we have it specifically stated already, you have to have those requirements. And so
Would you say both for the research
so number
technology and the general industrial and the agricultural?
So
if you got the agricultural?
So for agricultural, I think if you would have a special use, but we could, I don't know if we can already identify in our ordinance what those requirements are under special use.
I think we could say they have to meet this plus other things that are specially related to that property. But you could do that with the general industrial too. I'm just trying to see where we have a consensus so I can write it down and go to the next step.
And I'm just trying to think out loud the concept of the special use, because if we have it already written down, maybe they still have to say, we want to use it specifically for solar, and we say, that's fine. We don't have to come up with all of these different rules because we already have them in our ordinance. So we just say, okay, yep, special use, and you got to abide by these 15 things. And we don't have to create any new.
Right, and I kind of think where Mike said, I'm kind of inclined to say the UDO already says permitted use in the research technology. Let it be there, just list all of the requirements.
Yeah.
And then the general industrial, I guess, would be, well, and I don't know where we're going to put, I don't know where the technology park fits in. It seems to me, you know, the industrial, the business, it's a natural buffer. Where does the research and technology park fit in? Does it fit in as really like industrial?
It's similar to industrial, and I would like it almost.
So it'd be a heavier use than the business?
It can be, yes. And it is a heavier use than the general business, definitely. Because the reason why we adopted the RTMP is so that we could have the ethanol plant if it was going to come into the village.
Which is really a industrial use, I think.
It is.
Should we really even, should the village have an industrial use? You know, should that be deleted and just have the District 8?
Right,
Cover
That's
something.
what Frank was saying.
that's ultimately what I wanted to do, is delete general industrial and use number 8, the RTMP. Because I think that better defines what that should be. So
So general industrial is a proper use in a District 8.
correct.
Because it's that and then some.
Right. But I think if we are gonna have permitted, then 8 and 4 could have permitted uses, and we just have all our permitted uses. Or if we wanna do a special use, we can do it, but I think we need to list all of our requirements.
Right.
So that the general public and any business comes in knows what to expect.
Yes. And I think the residential, my main concern is protecting the residential, because the village is mainly residential. We live here.
Right.
That's why we're here, it's our home. We need to protect it. We can do that through the size of the panels, the distance from residential. That can be addressed later. Like, I still think down by 20 would be an appropriate place, and who cares if you have your 20-foot tower down there? Nobody is living there, and that might stop people from building a house there, but so be it. You know, that's, the long-range plan is what it's gonna be. So we can address that through the restrictions. So you're inclined for 8 and 4 to be just permitted uses.
Right.
If they were to go also with agricultural, is that gonna be special, or would that be?
See, I think that's special. I don't think you should be able to have agriculture and just all of a sudden put up your solar. I think you need to come to the village and say, we want to put solar there, and we have to determine is that a proper and good use.
Okay, I see a head nodding there, so you're agreeing with that. Where are you at, Mike?
I agree with that.
Irv?
I'm agreeing with Frank.
You're agreeing with,
Frank,
okay.
But then,
Where are you at?
I can go with that. I was thinking you should have it permitted, you know, there should be. I think the village setting itself up to treat two people differently. If they treat two people differently,
You get in trouble.
you get a suspect class, whatever, you get in trouble. And so as long as you have proper restrictions in there of distance and everything else, I think we're covered. So sure, everything that you think is important is in the ordinance. And there, I don't have a problem with that. The problem I have is the agricultural, that would definitely, I think, have to be special use for extra protections, but I don't think it should be. I think it should be in a proper classification, and you don't change agricultural to industrial just so you can put a solar farm in if that's not a proper place for industrial. You just say, sorry, you can't do it. It's my side of your
But
argument.
if we are going to have agriculture, we definitely want special use.
Yes, so we do have a consensus on
what
that.
about Dennis? We didn't get him.
Dennis, are you able to comment on that?
Yeah, I believe that the agriculture should be special use and the other two should be permitted use.
Thanks, Mary. I thought he was gone.
Okay, no problem.
And we do have a consensus that both general industrial and research technology would be proper classifications for a solar facility. Okay, this one should be a little bit easier. Should the restrictions placed on the commercial solar energy generation facility vary based on how close the subject property is to residential zoned property? I say yes. Is there anybody that disagrees with that? I think Frank was even agreeing with that. Irv? Dennis?
Yes, I agree with that.
Okay. Okay, and then the last one. Should there be should the village engage in the land use plan to figure out where it wants to go before it enacts this? I guess that's a legislative decision on their part, but I'm concerned with them passing something because they want it, and then as soon as they pass it, they're gonna feel like they have to let it happen, but they haven't done their proper planning. So I think that we should at least, I would suggest to them, you guys should do your planning before you pass an ordinance that you might step on yourself later.
And
The same way that I think they did with their UDO, they passed something that has some inconsistencies and some holes in it. They should have taken more time. And I think you can take, now maybe it took a long time.
Oh, my
It took
God.
over 4 years to get the UDO, so, I mean,
Okay,
meetings like this, at least once or twice a week for 4 years or whatever, I mean, it was a long time.
okay, sorry about that, I wasn't part of it.
Yeah,
But I would think that, I would like to recommend that. What's anybody else think? Frank, I know you're saying no,
no, but this
because
is,
you don't want it to slow you up, because they've already done it.
but this is what we do need, as you say, to recommend to the village board that they look at the future land use, they look at the current plan and look to see if they need to modify that current plan while they're considering the solar ordinance. Okay, so I think that's appropriate.
So at least it's brought to their
We need
attention.
to direct them to focus on that.
I agree with making that recommendation to them, that they should consider their land use development plan in conjunction with consideration of the ordinance.
Right, just to at least look at it to say, is this
Right.
generally what you think you still want? Not that they're doing a 2-year study on it right now, but
And obviously, the ordinance will state in there in conformance
What
with,
did you say? You had a word I didn't.
I said that they should consider the land use development plan in conjunction with
Okay,
the solar ordinance to make sure that they're both in that they're in
in
alignment.
alignment, right?
then I'm just gonna add in whether it needs to be updated.
Yeah.
When they're considering this. So we are direct, we're at least giving our opinion, which we think you should do this, so we're in consensus there, okay?
It's just a recommendation.
Right.
Right, that's all we're doing.
And the thing is, not only are we doing with solar, but we're going to be doing this with marijuana. I mean, that's something that's been sitting on my desk for the last 2 years, 3 years. We've had, that we need to have a zoning ordinance, whether to allow the growing of it and whether to allow the sale of it. So that's going to be another thing that we have to consider with our land use plan too, is that kind of thing. So it's not just going to be solar, but there's going to be other things that we need to update our land use because there are new things coming along that we didn't have back in 2007. So would this,
Okay, I think that we have there, and then 4, should this be a good place to what?
would this be a good place to stop and then we can review for the next meeting the things to consider restricting as individuals?
Yes, I think so, because that's just what I came up with, and I know that when we went through what's the last one? Oh, when we were trying to combine the research technology into
Yeah,
it got very confusing. And so that's why I think now at least we're following where we're going. But also, once we got going, I felt like we got lots of good input from people other than you and me on things that I had not thought about, and I don't think you'd thought about. And I'd like to list all those. So any things that you think we would areas or subjects or topics, we need to restrict this. Like you see what I have here, it's the proximity to residential, the height of the panels, whether they're fixed or tracking, which could create noise or whatever. Those are all things that I think we need to make sure are addressed in the ordinance as we go through, and a lot of them are. But if we list them all here that we can think of, then as we're going through the ordinance, if that's not in, we'll remember to address it. If we don't list it as one of the things we're looking for, I think we'll get in the middle of the ordinance where again, we're seeing the trees but not the forest, so we might forget about it. So I'd ask everybody to come up with items that you think we need to consider, or areas or things we need to consider restricting in this ordinance. And that's very important, especially if we're going to recommend that it be a permitted use as a special permitted, because we got to get them all in there. And there's probably things, well, I know there's some things that I forgot because I typed it last night, forgot to save it.
Oh.
So I redid it this morning, and I have more than I've got listed here. And it might come to a bit. One reason we have a committee is because you're gonna get 6 different opinions, and they're gonna be looking at it different, and we're gonna have a more thorough analysis of it than just if one person comes up with, like Mary trying to come up with something on any direction. So if you guys would do that when we come back, and then I think I did pass out to everybody my specific comments.
Could you
So you can-
email those to Kelly, and Kelly can get them to all of us again? Because I don't think.
I'll just give it to you.
Because Irvin.
Well, you have a copy, right? Specific comments to the draft of the proposal.
Yeah, that's what I had, I did.
Okay, if you just scan it and send it to them.
Yeah.
And the reason I did it, one, Mary, I don't know that I can redline on my computer.
Okay.
So this is, in essence, my redlining.
Okay.
And then, it wouldn't have been fair to you to, when I just write everything in red and my scribbling or whatever for you to understand and highlighting. So by the next meeting, I will come up with the last half of the ordinance. One thing that I'd like you guys to look at, has everybody read the ordinance?
I have, and my question is, Mary, and I wrote quite a few notes. Do you want those notes from me?
Yes,
Okay.
because then what I do is I try to incorporate them in, and say that who they came from.
I'll just
I don't know that we
email
need-
you my notes I wrote in the margins. Is that okay?
What I would ask you to do, Mike, is when you come to the next meeting, if some of these are, like I say, the topics, or the things we gotta consider, just bring them up, I'm gonna add them to the list.
Okay.
If it's rewording of a particular paragraph, then have it written out. Or if you can read there, bring it to the meeting and when we discuss that paragraph, say it. Because otherwise, if Mary goes through and redlines everything, then what I'm working off of is changed. And I gotta go back. So I would rather we take what she has and then we add it at this meeting here. If you wanna write it down on a piece of paper like I have here and pass it out so we all know.
Okay.
But otherwise, when I'm going through and I'm making comments about paragraph 5, if Mary's already redlined your changes, what I'm talking about
I see.
doesn't exist anymore.
Right. Okay.
And one thing I would like everybody to look at is the timing of everything, because I think we have issues. I think there was one point that there had to be a public hearing within 7 to 40 days of when they file their application. But then there's other time limits when you have your hearing that the village president, excuse me, and some other people get together and discuss something as to make a recommendation, I guess, if you're going to give the special use permit before it goes on to the village, but then the zoning officer only has 7 days to go ahead and tell somebody something's been rejected. I don't think the time frames work when I went through. I go back in more detail. A couple other things I thought of at the end of it is, the fee, the application fee. I kind of like to see an application fee which covers all the expenses, which I think you have there. But some expenses I'd like covered is, if there has to be a public hearing, I'd like to pay the high school their going rate for a public hearing if we have to have a meeting based upon an applicant applying for something and causing a public hearing. And if we think there's gonna be enough people doing it at the high school, that should be paid for. And so the fee would be high enough. And one other thing I just throw out for you to think about, the appraisals. I have trouble with the timing, because if the adjoining property, especially if they're residential, and use for example, the one that wants to come in, if they were to want to build there, the village, I think, should hire the appraisal, should contract for the appraisal, because I know they can get an appraisal. This is what I told the guy at the meeting. I know he can get an appraisal that says no negative effect on property values. I know I can get an appraisal to say there will be one. Whoever hires the appraiser is going to get kind of what they want. I know that through all my property tax work that I've done. So I think the village should hire. I'm almost like, if you really want to get a fair, true value, two independent of each other, do it, and then you see what they both did. If they agree, then you should feel fairly certain, is this going to cause a decrease in value? Those things cost, which should be a cost that goes into the application fee. But does that raise a bigger issue that for all special uses, when we're going to have the formal application, should there be some built-in costs that you say, here's your application fee cost. If it's not spent, you give it back to them.
Right.
But if there's going to be a public hearing and stuff, there are costs, how are they paying fees? Just something to think about, because those are things I'm going to bring up later on. But you guys can then think of how you want it done. What you think would be a good thing to cover costs.
We had,
I think Mike might agree with me on the school thing from the conversation we had.
Yeah.
The school should get its going rate.
a couple things. The school was used when the county had the ethanol plant hearing, and it was filled.
Yes.
A lot of people up there. We've used it for village purposes. We've never been charged because it's a village purpose.
Correct.
So we could put in there, if there is a fee incurred by the school, if the school charges, that yes, the applicant should be responsible for it. We have in the UDO an area where if a developer is coming to the village and wants to develop a project, we have them give us a $5,000 deposit. We then draw down our engineering costs and our attorney costs off of that. And then if we have anything left over, we refund it. And if they bring it down to a certain level, they have to replenish it. That then is to take away the freebie that we were giving as a village. Now, we can do the same thing through the zoning and special use and variance application, the same type of thing.
And I think, you and I totally agree on. If there's something the village wants to have a meeting on, from something it's doing on its own, and the school's going to give it to you, fine. But if it's initiated from an outside source and that's causing you to have a hearing, I don't think the school should have to absorb that cost. That should just be part of doing business for the people that are coming in. And then consider, do we need to have a court reporter there for a transcript?
Right.
So what information, because the public hearing is to give us information so that we can make a recommendation to the village board, and for them to be fully informed, should we have a transcript so we all know what was said, as opposed to the more complicated things? Yes. An ethanol plant, definitely yes. The landfill, God, yes, that was huge.
Right.
You know, these smaller things like the two we did tonight, no. So that'll be like a judgment thing on the village's part. But it's something brand new that I thought of that's really not addressed in there, that I thought I would give you guys an idea of what I'm going to talk about, so that you'll be ready to respond to it with your own ideas when I bring it up at our next meeting.
No, I think we do need to consider.
Because those are the two things, the timing of it and the cost.
And then back to just the ordinance again. I would ask you, just like Joel gave me, get me your comments, because my intention is not to do any redlining. But I think it might be helpful to you, time permitting, for me to add comments on that. It's not changing the redlining, but that way, rather than having to go on for 5 different documents, what did Riley say? What did Frank say? You know, again, that's what I intended, just in the bubbles on the side.
Yeah. But if I could, what I intended to do for Mary, things that I thought were important, I actually drafted. I said, here's what I think it should say. And when we go through this item by item, we have a consensus. My intent is we will come up with the exact wording to give it to Mary, so she doesn't have to word it herself. We've given it to her. So she just has to insert it. And so if you see something that you think is important and you think it should be written that way, write it out. And then whatever we agree on consensus-wise, we give it to Mary and she can just insert it. And that would be our way of redlining. We're giving you the exact wording. That I think is, if I were you, that's more important for me because now I know how I got to reword that. The redlining, if we've got 2 or 3 redlining, what do we have?
Yeah.
And so it goes back to the last time we had the meeting on combining the 2. I didn't know what we agreed on, what we passed by the end of the meeting. I know we had a good discussion.
Right.
And so we need to give Mary specific wording if we can. If you see something you think is really important in one of those sections, write it out like you think it should read. And between the group of us, if we agree on it, we can reword it if necessary. By the time we're done with that section, here's the exact wording we want. We have a consensus on. And the things we don't know, I've made notes on so that we know what we're not agreeing. That is my intent in going through it. It's going to be time consuming, but by the time we're done, we'll be able to give the village board something that we agree, here's the wording we want for the whole thing. It's just not, generally it's good. I want to give them a finished product that we think, if we were in your position, we would pass it as drafted. There aren't holes in it or whatever. That's my intent. I know it's time consuming, but that's why I did what I did. If you guys want to do it differently, let me know, because I'm not saying it has to be done my way. It's just, I think this is a good way of doing it. But if the consensus wants to do it the other way, let me know and I will go the other way.
So far it's working, so we'll continue with it.
Okay.
I mean, I think it's.
I just want people to be able to express their thoughts in terms of, if you don't have what you think is the perfect wording, if you got an area that is bringing you some concern, then just let me know so that we can make sure it's all covered.
Yeah, and I would appreciate you still bring it
Right.
on a separate sheet, because I don't want to have to reread this with new notes in it.
Okay.
Yeah, all that anybody would be doing is they're preparing it, but they're just getting it to me in advance. So if I think, and you're still presenting it to
Answer
the
the
group,
questions or.
but if I can, somehow, thank you, address it or help in the process, that's all it's looking at.
Okay, entertain a motion to adjourn.
Wait, are we on their agenda? Are we?
Oh, I'm sorry. The old business, Kelly asked me if I wanted it listed, and I thought it was a good idea to have it listed so things don't drop between the cracks, but I had no intention of really acting upon them.
And I did under that, I sent an email, because I had done it before and it was in my drafts, and I noticed that today, that you had asked about sending to Mr. Ackerman to get some specifics.
Yeah, where's he at?
from him. Right, and so you all have a copy of that.
Okay, so we don't know where he's at yet.
Right, and because you had said whether or not he wanted to address it at the May or the June meeting, and so I put it in there.
Okay, and they updated the UDO and incorporation. I think we all got a copy of the proposed ordinance to the village pass it.
Yep.
Okay, then that can be taken off the list for next time, Kelly. Thank you, Mike, for bringing this up. And then the Woodward Sioux Kelly Road pre-annexation, I don't know if anything new has come up, other than they've been made aware of it, so it's up to them to come back to us and say if they want to do something. Go ahead.
I did talk to Chief Lorian last week after their board meeting at the fire department at Woodward Sioux. And he did say they do want to pursue it.
Okay,
So he is asking that, because it kind of dropped off of everybody's radar. So I told him I would get copies of the last meeting when it was discussed here.
okay, and then they would start anew with a pre-annexation request.
Yeah.
Right.
So once we get that, that could drop off here because it's new. And that's the only reason I have it there. You guys, this list might get long, but at least it doesn't drop through the cracks. If that's what I intend to do, if it's okay with you guys.
We do that at the board meeting, we do that at the committee, we keep things either on the agenda or in a special spot so that we don't forget it. So-
Okay.
And just to be clear I believe that B stays on, because that's a general thing we're working for the future of updating the UDO and
Correct.
I'll
incorporating
update
the
the UDO.
1957 zoning ordinance. What we did before was the ordinance that Frank indicated that we passed to say
So it's been
that
incorporated,
it's going to apply.
but you're gonna,
But we gotta do the update, so.
okay, and that's the thing that I think will take a long time, and we'll break it into sections. Thank you, Merrick.
So yeah, that's
And thank
what
you,
B
Mike,
stays.
Bring that to my attention. And I don't have any new business. Anybody have anything new?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded, roll call?
Booker,
Yes.
Emmett,
Yes.
Eubank,
Yes.
Koenig,
Yes.
McDougal,
Yes.
Pitney,
Yes.
All right,
Okay,
Ty.
it is 9:21. All right, thank you, everybody, for joining. Thank you, Molly, for attending tonight. And we'll let you know when we have the next zoning board meeting.
well, we should know.
Well, it's the fourth Monday. It's-
Well, what date is, do we know what date it is? Everybody,
April 24.
Thank you. Yep, it's the 30th.
and we start at 6:00.
Sounds good. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.